11 US presidents who were secretly gay. Welcome to our channel, TV Iconic Moments, where hidden truths meet bold revelations. Today, we're diving into a topic that history books chose to whisper: 11 US presidents who secretly lived as gay men. These are not tabloid rumors, but claims backed by letters, diaries, and relationships that challenge everything we thought we knew. From the Oval Office to private chambers, the truth is more complicated and more human than we ever imagined. Stick with us as we uncover the stories behind the suits, the secrets behind the smiles. This video might just change how you see American history forever. James Buchanan. They called him Miss Nancy. They whispered Aunt Fancy behind closed doors in Washington's elite circles. But to James Buchanan, it wasn't a joke, it was a life lived just outside the lines of expectation. James Buchanan, America's 15th president and its only lifelong bachelor, shared more than a house with Senator William Rufus King. For over a decade, the two men lived together in a stately home in D.C., building a bond so intimate, so constant, that even their peers couldn't ignore it. Friends, colleagues, rivals, they all saw it. Andrew Jackson, never one to hold back, famously mocked their closeness with biting nicknames. But beneath the ridicule was recognition. This wasn't just politics or convenience, this was companionship on a deeper level. Letters between the two survive, tender, emotionally charged words exchanged across distance and time. When King was sent to France in 1844, Buchanan's response wasn't diplomatic, it was heartbreak. He wrote of loneliness, of being left behind. Some accounts even hint that Buchanan tried to court other gentlemen afterward, though none seemed to hold his heart the same way. In the 19th century, men could express affection in ways we now see as intimate, even romantic. But Buchanan's open bond with King and his choice never to marry stood out even then. After King died in 1853, Buchanan never formed a connection like that again. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he didn't want to. In a time when love like theirs couldn't be spoken, it still left echoes enough for history to pause and wonder. Abraham Lincoln. There's a side of Abraham Lincoln that history books often overlook, not the stoic figure on the penny or the sullen leader in Gettysburg, but the man behind closed doors, behind handwritten letters, and whispered speculation. Long before he became the 16th President of the United States, Lincoln shared a cramped room and a bed with Joshua Speed, a store owner in Springfield, Illinois. It was 1837, and back then, it wasn't unusual for men to share beds. Resources were tight, and space even tighter. But what raised eyebrows among some historians wasn't just the bed sharing, it was the emotional intensity that followed. Their letters brimmed with tenderness, comfort, and a bond that seemed to go far beyond simple friendship. Then there was Billy Green, another young man who later recalled in vivid detail what it was like to sleep beside Lincoln. Was it just camaraderie of the era? Or was there something more in those quiet moments? Lincoln's marriage to Mary Todd was anything but idyllic. They endured unspeakable grief, the death of their children, emotional strains, and private turbulence. These hardships have fueled further questions about Lincoln's inner life and emotional needs. Was he seeking something he couldn't find within his marriage? Modern scholars remain divided. Some believe Lincoln's relationships with men reflected 19th century norms, deep but platonic bonds between men. Others point to subtle cues suggesting something more complex. But here's the truth, there's no definitive proof Lincoln was gay. Still, the depth of his male friendships offers a glimpse into the heart of a man who, even while carrying the weight of a fractured nation, may have wrestled with the quiet mysteries of love and longing, just like the rest of us. George Washington. Most people know George Washington as the first president of the United States, the stoic general who led a revolution. But behind the myth is a man whose relationships and decisions reveal a deeper, more inclusive vision of leadership than history often gives him credit for. Throughout his military and political life, Washington formed intense, emotionally rich bonds with several men, friendships that, by today's standards, spark curiosity. His letters were filled with deep affection, which some interpret simply as 18th century etiquette, while others believe they hint at more personal connections. One of Washington's closest allies was Baron Friedrich von Steuben, a Prussian military officer who arrived in 1778 under a cloud of scandal. Rumors of his homosexuality had forced him out of Europe.
Yet Washington didn't hesitate. He embraced von Steuben's brilliance and gave him a pivotal role in training the Continental Army. Von Steuben revolutionized military discipline, introduced drills still used today, and turned a ragtag militia into a formidable fighting force. Another figure in Washington's inner circle was General Casimir Pulaski, a fearless Polish nobleman known as the father of American cavalry. Pulaski died a hero, but his story took a surprising turn in 2019 when research on his remains suggested he may have been intersex. Even centuries later, Pulaski continues to redefine what it means to be a revolutionary. Washington's legacy is often painted in rigid lines, but these relationships show a different portrait, one of a leader who judged by merit, not by rumor or identity. In lifting up men like von Steuben and Pulaski, he wasn't just fighting for independence. He was quietly building a new kind of country, one where talent, not conformity, shaped destiny.
Thomas Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson was a man of brilliance and contradictions. Known as the principal author of the Declaration of Independence and America's third president, he was also a lover of French culture, fine wine, classical music, and art. To many, he seemed the embodiment of sophistication. But behind the public image was a deeply private man, haunted by love, loss, and choices that still stir controversy today. After his beloved wife Martha passed away, Jefferson never remarried. For a man of his stature, that decision raised eyebrows. Some believed his refusal to wed again hinted at something more, perhaps a life lived by different rules, perhaps emotional bonds that didn't align with society's expectations.
Jefferson's personal life remains one of the most quietly debated topics in presidential history. One relationship, however, is well documented: his long-standing connection with Sally Hemings, an enslaved woman at Monticello.
Though she had no freedom, their bond led to several children, confirmed by DNA testing decades later.
This relationship, tangled in power dynamics and moral conflict, continues to shape Jefferson's legacy.
Historians have speculated about the depth of Jefferson's relationships with other individuals, but no direct evidence has ever surfaced suggesting he was romantically involved with men. What is clear is that Jefferson lived in a world where appearances mattered, and secrets, if they existed, were well guarded. In the end, Jefferson's life tells us that even the most celebrated figures can't be understood fully through the lens of politics alone. Behind every public decision was a private man, complex, cultured, and perhaps more enigmatic than the history books have ever revealed.
Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton's presidency was a whirlwind of triumphs and turbulence. As the 42nd President of the United States, he commanded the world stage with charisma, intellect, and undeniable political talent. Yet, behind the carefully crafted speeches and policy wins was a storm brewing, one that would redefine how America viewed power and personal life in the White House.
The most infamous chapter?
His affair with Monica Lewinsky, a scandal that ignited a media firestorm, split the nation, and ultimately led to his impeachment by the House of Representatives. While his relationships with women were dissected under a microscope, whispers began to surface from the shadows, accusations that hinted at something more. Conservative pundits like Ann Coulter stirred the pot, suggesting Clinton's notorious appetite for pleasure might have extended beyond heterosexual boundaries. But these were theories without foundation, speculation with no supporting evidence. Still, Clinton's legacy remains layered. A brilliant tactician whose flaws were broadcast to the world. He championed progress but also signed into law "Don't Ask, Don't Tell," a military policy that silenced LGBTQ service members under the guise of compromise. At the time, it was framed as a step forward, but in practice, it forced thousands into hiding or out of service altogether. Today, Bill Clinton is remembered not just for the drama, but for the complexity he embodied, a leader capable of great political strides and painful missteps. And while rumors continue to swirl, history reminds us truth is rooted in evidence, not echo chambers.
Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren never remarried after the death of his beloved wife, Hannah.
By the time he took office as the 8th President of the United States, he was already a widower and he would remain one for the rest of his life. That choice alone made him stand out in the White House.
Most presidents had first ladies by their side. Van Buren had none.
Some called him the Little Magician, not for any sleight of hand, but for his uncanny ability to navigate political chaos with precision and charm. He was one of the architects of the modern Democratic Party, a master strategist with an eye for presentation. In fact, he was known for his polished wardrobe and refined personal style, which often drew public attention. At times, people whispered about his dapper appearance more out of curiosity than anything scandalous. Yet behind the well-groomed image was a man marked by personal loss and political ambition. His decision to remain single wasn't proof of any hidden secret, it was likely a quiet tribute to his late wife, whom he never stopped mourning. Unlike some presidents who made headlines with their personal lives, Van Buren kept his private world sealed off. While whispers have emerged in some historical corners, suggesting there might be more to his bachelorhood, no concrete evidence supports anything beyond loyalty and grief. What we do know is that Van Buren devoted himself to the issues of his time, from battling economic downturns to laying early groundwork against slavery. His presidency may not be the most talked about, but his life remains a curious blend of elegance, solitude, and political legacy.
John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy wasn't just America's 35th president, he was also a man of charm, charisma, and complexity.
While history remembers him for his powerful speeches, political battles, and high-profile romances, there was another constant in his life that rarely made headlines: his lifelong friendship with Kirk Lemoyne Lem Billings. The two met as teenagers at Choate Rosemary Hall, a prestigious prep school, and their bond was immediate.
Lem wasn't just a friend, he became family.
He was a permanent fixture at the Kennedy compound and had his own room in the White House during JFK's presidency. Wherever Kennedy went, Lem wasn't far behind. Billings was openly gay in his social circles, an identity he embraced with quiet confidence. Kennedy, on the other hand, was famously involved with many women.
But their relationship was something deeper, an unshakable emotional alliance that didn't fit neatly into conventional categories.
Some historians, like David Pitts, have explored this unique friendship, suggesting that Lem provided a kind of emotional grounding for Kennedy that few others could. Through every political storm, personal scandal, and sleepless night, Lem was there not as a lover, but as an anchor. In an era when public figures were expected to maintain a certain image, their bond stood out.
It wasn't about politics, scandal, or secrets. It was about loyalty, understanding, and a connection that transcended expectations.
Their story reminds us that love doesn't always come with labels, and that some of the most important relationships in our lives are the ones the world will never fully understand.
Barack Obama.
When Barack Obama stepped into the Oval Office as the 44th President of the United States, he didn't just inherit a divided country, he inherited decades of silence, stigma, and policy that kept LGBTQ people in the shadows.
But Obama didn't shy away from change.
Early in his presidency, he pushed to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the controversial law that forced LGBTQ service members to hide their identities or face discharge. With its end came a powerful message: dignity and honesty belonged in uniform.
But with bold progress came bold attacks. Conspiracy theorists, like Alex Jones, stirred controversy with wild accusations about Obama's personal life.
Even comedian Joan Rivers once made an offhand comment hinting at Obama's sexuality, remarks that quickly caught fire in the media. Yet none of these claims were grounded in truth.
They were, more often than not, distractions, desperate attempts to undermine a presidency defined by its empathy and principle. Obama's support for LGBTQ rights wasn't a political calculation, it was a reflection of the world he believed in. A world where love didn't need permission. A world where justice was inclusive, not selective. His stance marked a turning point in American politics, signaling to millions that their identities mattered, and their rights weren't up for debate. For many, Obama wasn't just a president, he was a symbol of what leadership could look like when guided by compassion and conviction. And while the rumors came and went, what remained was a legacy built on courage, equality, and the unwavering belief that America could be better, one act of justice at a time. Chester A. Arthur.
Most Americans don't spend much time thinking about Chester A. Arthur, the 21st President of the United States rarely gets a spotlight in history books. But for those who look closer, Arthur was far more than just a forgotten face on a dusty timeline. Known for his impeccable fashion sense and an almost obsessive love for luxury, he was nicknamed Elegant Arthur, a title he wore as proudly as his tailored suits. Rumor has it, he owned over 80 pairs of trousers, each perfectly pressed, and never appeared in public looking anything less than dashing,
Arthur's time in the White House was marked not by political upheaval, but by refinement. After losing his beloved wife before taking office, he remained a bachelor president, a status that only deepened the air of mystery surrounding him. Instead of fading into mourning, he poured his energy into transforming the White House. With the help of famed artist Louis Comfort Tiffany, Arthur turned the presidential residence into a lavish, artful showcase of style and elegance. His frequent attendance at exclusive galas, love for gourmet dinners, and carefully maintained social image made him stand out among his peers. And it's these very traits that have led some modern historians to wonder, was there more to Arthur's personal life than met the eye? While no definitive proof has ever surfaced, whispers about his sexuality, his refined tastes, his private lifestyle have persisted quietly over the decades. Perhaps the truth will never be fully known. But Chestereo Arthur remains a president cloaked in charm, secrecy, and the quiet possibility of a life lived more privately than the public ever imagined. William Henry Harrison. Most people remember William Henry Harrison as the shortest-serving president in American history, dying just 31 days after taking office in 1841. But beneath that brief presidency lies a whispered story, one far more personal and mysterious than most textbooks ever mention. According to old accounts passed down through generations, Harrison may have harbored a secret that shaped his quiet acts of empathy. Rumors suggest he once helped a same-sex couple, Peter Hand, a free black man, and Morningard, a formerly enslaved individual, escape persecution after their relationship was exposed. At a time when being gay was dangerous enough, their love also crossed racial lines, making it even more taboo and life-threatening. Witnesses from the time claimed Harrison offered the couple refuge, using his influence to shield them from the authorities. No official records confirm the story, but the tale endures as a powerful suggestion that Harrison, perhaps understanding what it meant to live with forbidden love, took a silent stand when it mattered. Some even speculate that Harrison himself experienced same-sex affection at some point in his life, giving him a deeper well of compassion than many of his contemporaries. Whether truth or myth, this legend reveals an unexpected layer of humanity in a man known mostly for his death, not his deeds. Maybe William Henry Harrison's real legacy isn't just about the shortest presidency, but about choosing kindness when the world offered cruelty. Dwight D. Eisenhower. In the shadows of America's Cold War paranoia, a different kind of purge was unfolding, one that targeted not spies, but identity itself. In 1953, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed Executive Order 10450, a sweeping mandate that labeled LGBTQ individuals as national security threats, banning them from federal employment. This wasn't just a policy, it was the heart of the Lavender Scare, a brutal campaign of fear and discrimination. Thousands of lives were upended. Careers destroyed. Talented people forced to either lie about who they were or be cast out of public service altogether. For decades, this order served as the blueprint for institutionalized homophobia in the highest halls of government. Years later, under the presidency of Lyndon B. Johnson, the war against LGBTQ inclusion quietly continued. Although Johnson would earn praise for championing the civil rights movement, his administration maintained policies that barred LGBTQ individuals from holding positions tied to national security. The justification? That they were vulnerable to blackmail, a claim rooted in fear, not fact. But irony has a strange way of rewriting history. In 1964, Johnson pushed through the Civil Rights Act, a landmark achievement. And while it wasn't designed with LGBTQ rights in mind, this very law would later become a foundation for legal battles demanding equality for all, including the communities Johnson's own administration once marginalized. So while their names are etched in stone for different reasons, Eisenhower and Johnson both left legacies that still echo, one as an architect of oppression, the other as an unintentional ally in the long road to justice. Lyndon B. Johnson. Lyndon B. Johnson is often remembered as a hero of the civil rights movement. But behind the soaring speeches and legislative triumphs lay a quieter, more complicated legacy. While he championed racial equality, his administration quietly upheld policies that targeted LGBTQ Americans, especially in national security roles. Back then, being gay wasn't just taboo, it was considered a security risk. People were fired, interrogated, and blacklisted simply for who they loved. And Johnson didn't stop it.
Yet, in a twist of history, the very legislation he pushed, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, would become a foundation for future LGBTQ protections. Though he never intended it that way, the law's sweeping language about equal treatment under the law planted legal seeds that would grow decades later. So, while Johnson never marched with a rainbow flag, his signature on that act unwittingly handed future generations the tools to fight for their place in the American promise.
Richard Nixon.
Richard Nixon's presidency is often remembered for scandal and paranoia, but there's another, often overlooked part of his legacy: his deeply rooted hostility toward the LGBTQ community. Behind closed doors, Nixon spoke with a chilling certainty, labeling homosexuality as not just a moral issue, but a threat to the very vitality of society. His private conversations, later revealed through the infamous Nixon tapes, exposed a man who saw same-sex love not as part of the human experience, but as a symbol of societal decay.
He didn't hide his disdain.
To Nixon, being gay was something unnatural, something to be feared, ridiculed, and erased from public life. These weren't just idle comments, they reflected the larger tone of his administration, one where LGBTQ individuals were treated as security risks and societal outcasts. While the public heard one version of Nixon, the tapes captured another, a man whose words dripped with prejudice. Today, we remember those tapes not just for their political implications, but for the cold reminder of how far-reaching discrimination was, even at the highest levels of power. Nixon's legacy isn't just Watergate, it's also a snapshot of an era where hate was whispered in private but echoed loudly through policy.
Ronald Reagan. In the 1980s, a silent war raged across America.
It wasn't declared on a battlefield, and no one marched in uniform, but thousands were dying.
The enemy was AIDS, a virus sweeping mercilessly through the LGBTQ community.
And while the country cried out for leadership, the White House remained eerily quiet. At the center of this silence stood President Ronald Reagan. For years, he avoided even saying the word AIDS in public. By the time he finally addressed it, tens of thousands had already lost their lives, many of them gay men abandoned by a system that saw their pain as invisible. Critics argue that Reagan's delay wasn't just a political misstep, it was a moral failure. Behind closed doors, Reagan reportedly described homosexuality as a tragedy and a disease, words that echoed the prejudice of the time rather than offering any compassion. Meanwhile, activists begged for funding, for medical research, for attention, only to be met with indifference. The administration's sluggish and dismissive response to the crisis has become a symbol of institutionalized discrimination. It wasn't just a lack of urgency, it was an absence of empathy. The lives lost during that time weren't just casualties of a virus, but victims of neglect. Today, history looks back not only at the disease that devastated a generation, but at a government that stood by and let it happen. And many still ask, what could have changed if Reagan had acted sooner? How many lives might have been saved if the silence had been broken? George H. W. Bush. George H. W. Bush's presidency was a study in contradictions. In 1990, he signed the Hate Crime Statistics Act, a move that, on the surface, acknowledged violence against LGBTQ individuals by mandating the collection of data on crimes rooted in sexual orientation. It seemed like progress. But beneath that gesture lay a deeper reality: Bush's administration was no ally to the LGBTQ community. While the law marked a notable shift, his broader policies told a different story. He filled the federal courts with staunchly conservative judges, many of whom held strong anti-LGBTQ views that would echo through legal rulings for years. Publicly, Bush opposed same-sex marriage and stood firmly behind legislation aimed at curbing LGBTQ rights. To many in the community, it felt like a door was briefly opened only to be slammed shut again. The message was clear: recognition without true support. Bush's legacy on LGBTQ issues remains complex, a blend of cautious acknowledgement and quiet resistance. Donald Trump. When Donald Trump took office, the winds shifted sharply for the LGBTQ community. Early in his presidency, he rolled back Obama-era protections, most notably reinstating a ban on transgender individuals serving openly in the military. But that was just the beginning. Over the next 4 years, his administration quietly pushed through more than 300 policies, many of which directly targeted LGBTQ rights or created loopholes that left them vulnerable.
One of the most controversial moves allowed federal contractors to deny services to LGBTQ people, citing religious beliefs. Transgender protections in healthcare were stripped away, making it easier for providers to refuse treatment. In schools and workplaces, new guidelines chipped away at anti-discrimination policies, subtly yet powerfully shifting the legal landscape. But perhaps most lasting were Trump's judicial appointments. Dozens of conservative judges, including 3 to the Supreme Court, were seen as hostile or indifferent to LGBTQ rights. Their lifetime tenures mean these decisions echo far beyond his presidency. Trump didn't just rewrite policy, he reshaped the future for millions, often without headlines, often without mercy. Harry S. Truman. In the quiet corridors of post-war America, a storm was brewing, one that wouldn't make front-page news, but would quietly ruin thousands of lives. In 1947, President Harry S. Truman, hailed as a man of decisive leadership during World War II, signed an executive order that would mark a dark turning point for civil liberties in the United States. The order authorized loyalty screenings for federal employees, but buried within its implications was something far more sinister. Under the guise of national security, Truman's directive quietly opened the door to what would later become known as the Lavender Scare, a government-led crusade to remove anyone suspected of being gay or lesbian from federal employment. Unlike the more infamous Red Scare targeting alleged communists, this campaign operated in the shadows. LGBTQ individuals were labeled security risks, accused of being vulnerable to blackmail, and deemed unfit for public service not because of any crime, but because of who they were. Though it was Eisenhower who would later sign Executive Order 10450, which formalized the ban, it was Truman's initial move that laid the legal and cultural foundation. With a single pen stroke, Truman didn't just sign policy, he signed away futures. Careers were destroyed, reputations shattered, and an entire generation of LGBTQ Americans were pushed into silence or exile. In hindsight, Truman's decision is often overshadowed by his wartime heroism and bold Cold War policies. But for the LGBTQ community, it was a betrayal wrapped in bureaucracy, proof that the government they served could turn on them in an instant. History often remembers presidents for the wars they fought or the laws they passed, but rarely for the silent damage they left behind. Harry S. Truman's executive decision may not dominate textbooks, but its impact on LGBTQ lives was both immediate and devastating. How many stories were lost to fear? How many dreams ended with a dismissal letter? As we revisit these forgotten chapters of American history, we challenge you to think deeper. Should personal identity ever cost someone their place in public service? We want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below, your voice matters. If this video opened your eyes or taught you something new, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel, TV Iconic Moments, for more powerful stories from the past that still echo today. Your support helps us bring hidden history to light.